Hey, how you doing? How's your journey going today? This is a circuit rider, and I'm back with another video. And this is I'm just wondering. And we have a talk and a discussion about things that are happening in our world and how they would affect us. Things you hear on the nightly news or the morning news. Things that are on the internet. Things that are happening and coming at us at lightning speed, and we're probably in a transition period that's the most dramatic and perhaps impactful that the human race has ever known. We've talked about artificial intelligence, and we'll talk about it again soon because it's one of those things that's updated almost daily on the news and in the big tech community as changes are being made. This program today, this video today, is going to be a continuation of one that I just made, and we're talking about the continuing discussion on genetic engineering, gene therapy, and gene editing. In my initial coverage of this in the previous video, I could just touch a little bit on what it is and what the scientific community is doing, and you'll get to this later in this video and in every video that I make. But I think all that science is doing as they research the human body and the makeup of the human body, the Human Genome Project that we talked about from the 1990s to 2003, the CRISPR-Cas9 discovery in 2012 by the two female research scientists. All of these things that the scientific community is doing, and they will readily admit that they have not touched the beginning of understanding the makeup of the human body, because as I mentioned in the previous video, the human body is a universe as vast, in my opinion, as the universe of outer space. And the way it's made is astounding. Scientists can study the makeup and they can give it names. I mentioned that in 1909, Wilhelm Johansen, a Danish botanist and geneticist, coined the term gene, and that term was accepted into the medical community. And today we talk about, you got good genes, and so science comes up as they make these discoveries with names for different things. Some of it's the makeup of the human body itself. I mean, when you talk about the DNA, then you got to talk about RNA, which is impacts DNA and gives it messages many times. Because the Human Genome Project began taking us down that path, which had been studied for about 100 years or more, of breaking it down in the discovery of the electron microscope in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the improvement through technology and through computer assistance enabled the scientific community to look at smaller and smaller and smaller particles in the human body. So they could look at a human cell, then they could look at the DNA, then they could look at the RNA, then they could look at the molecular structure of the gene, what a gene was and its molecular structure. And they could look at then the atoms, the amino acids, the proteins, all these things that they at some time named and they work with on a day-to-day basis and are very familiar with those terms. But in my opinion, all they're looking at is the handiwork of God. they can't create life. They can take a living organism. They're now growing brain cells, heart cells, and other things for research and trying to figure out how to eradicate certain diseases, if not all diseases. And I don't want to get sick. You don't either. I don't want to be, my body to be invaded by some dread disease. But the research itself is somewhat biased, and I'll tell you about that. I don't mean that they're all working for the man, but I mean that there is, for instance, this CRISPR-Cas9 tool that these research scientists discovered, which is they've been able to redesign something that the body was already doing, its molecular structure was already doing, and make that into a tool that cuts into the human cell, cuts into the chromosome, cuts into the DNA, and into the RNA, and delivers a message, because they have studied through the Genome Project what structures there are in the human body that send messages. There's part of the structure that sends a message to my brain that tells it how to function, part of it that sends a message to my skeletal structure that tells it how to function, to my muscle group, it tells it how to function, to my heart, lungs, kidneys, and to my nerve system. And there's a unique design, the way the body works, to send messages to all these systems to tell them how to function. And so if there's some kind of genetic mutation in the genes that send the wrong message, then we have problems like cancer, muscular dystrophy, MS, Parkinson's, sickle cell, things that are happening in the eye, different diseases that attack different parts of the body. And so they're working on trying to eradicate some of these hereditary problems. And then they're also working, obviously, on how to, we've got an issue in America today with the bird flu. All of a sudden, the media focused in on that. I think there have been a few issues, less than a dozen, probably just 2 or 3 from what I've understood. Human beings impacted because the bird flu has figured out a way, as all viruses do, to mutate itself to where after so many generations it's able to invade, in this case, the bovine community. And we got cows getting sick with the bird flu, and then we're drinking their milk and eating their flesh, and people who have to work with them and take care of them have been the first ones that have found out that that virus is now mutated from the cows into human beings. There was a time when scientists thought that the bird flu virus, and it's got a number, a name, H5N, whatever, 1 or whatever it is, would not able to invade the human body, but it is now. So they're working on all this, and certainly that's an admirable position to be in. So I'm not against people trying to figure out how to make us better, but just like with the they call it the jab or the shot or whatever you want to call it for the COVID-19, they found out that there were some side effects, some of them deadly side effects. And then they came out with one vaccine upgrade after another, and then all of a sudden you're getting the shots 2 to 3 times a year. And we're suffering right now from vaccine fatigue, I understand, in America, where because the death toll went down and it quit being broadcast as much by the media, and the medical community is perplexed today because people aren't taking the injections to build the immune system in the human body against COVID-19 and SARS. Don't have time to elaborate on that because I ran out of time last time just getting the basis of what I'm going to talk about today. Well, we talked about the human genome itself. Once they identified the whole structure, identified all the letters. I mentioned last time that there were molecular structures that made up the gene and that then made up the RNA and made up the DNA and sent messages for the body to function. And if in the case of the human reproductive organs, they would send messages to the X and Y chromosomes, the male-female chromosomes, with inherited traits. We talked about last time too that scientists had discovered once they mapped out the human genome and found out it only had 3 billion letter sequences to have the complete human DNA, that the sequence of those letters were unique to each and every individual. Every individual, according to scientific study at this point, their DNA is unique and different. And that means that the molecular structure and the way that the sequence that these letters are arranged in, the 3 billion letters, make up our traits and characteristics. We touched on that last time. How many genes are in the human body? There's some discussion about that because some of it, I think, is an estimate. They think there's 25,000 genes in the human body. Some say 15, some say 20, some say more. We touched on the fact that we're at the crossroads in medical care because we're looking at preventative care now rather than just treatment of existing diseases. So that's where we are. We started last time discussing some of the problems, and I broke it down into 3 different areas: the process problems, the ethical problems, and the biblical problems. And as we attacked the process problems and talked about what's wrong with the CRISPR-Cas9 and what are some of the issues, it's not 100% effective. It's anywhere from 15 to 60%, I think, depending on what disease they're trying to attack or what hereditary problem they're trying to attack. By the way, it's not in big uses in humans yet because they're still studying it in test animals, and it is moving forward in the agricultural world as they're trying to make healthier and healthier corn. And the GMO's been around for a while now, and genetically modified organisms. So CRISPR has a problem with and the medical community has a problem with, it doesn't always work. Then we talked about some of the off-target problems. It could kill the cell. It could mutate the cell into something else that maybe well-intentioned intervention in the human body could turn into a nightmare. Part of the mutations that they were concerned about and are concerned about is it could lead to cancer. It could lower the immune system and, in essence, could wreak havoc in the human body if they cut in the wrong place. And the problem with that tool that they have is if they cut off target, meaning it's not the genes or the DNA that they intended to target, it could cut in places that they don't recognize, and it could cause problems by injecting this cocktail, this molecular cocktail, in the wrong places in the human body, and the results may be 2 or 3 generations from now before it shows up. There was a big brouhaha about a Chinese researcher who injected, using CRISPR-Cas9, into the embryo of twins, and he was imprisoned, I think, for 3 years, but he's back practicing again. And the scientific community worldwide condemned him. The Chinese government condemned him because he's messing with something that they don't know what's going to happen. One of the other issues, I think, and we'll get to it, is the cost of CRISPR and other genetic interventions. If you're going to try to eradicate a certain disease, they've had some success with sickle cell now, and there are just recently reports of improvements in some of the issues of the eye. But when I looked up, what does it cost to get a CRISPR-Cas9 treatment? And the cost was $2.2 million. And one of the labs, I think it's $4.5 million. And so it's the elitist tool at this point. The masses will not be able to take advantage of this. And some people, both in dealing with artificial intelligence and in dealing with biometrics and in dealing with genetic therapy and genetic gene editing and changing the genes, believe that this is going to cause a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, and that the have-nots are going to be the losers, which brings us to our next issue of ethical problems. Designer babies. There's some concern that those who have the wherewithal to use this could create a designer baby, and they could make it with the color hair and the color eyes they wanted it, and without any medical issues or problems once they looked into the embryo, and if it had any history of any mutations in that embryo, the makeup of the embryo. I read one report when I was researching this, talking about abortions, that abortions this year, or 2023, there was a group called the Guttmacher, I believe is the way you pronounce it, which is friendly to the abortion process. They're in favor of it and trying to promote it. But they do a research. They contact every abortion clinic, every hospital, every doctor in the United States to try to get an idea about how many abortions. Abortions went up last year, some believe because of the Supreme Court shooting down Roe v. Wade. But the number of abortions performed in the U.S. last year that are traceable, that are able to get a number on, was 1,026,700. And another report I read in the statistical data that makes that up said that abortions, one of the fetus abortions, or whatever you call it, because I'm not for abortions. It's a biblical stand that I have, and I just don't buy the abortions. But that between 63 and 93% of all Down syndrome embryos or embryonic state, or the fetuses were aborted. And so we're already, even though the young mothers are mothers that get these because their study was between 15 and 44 years old. And I'm not saying all these mothers are elitist, because the predominant was still the poor and impoverished and a minority group. But I am saying that the intention may not be there by the mothers that need these abortions for whatever reason. 25% of the abortions in the study last year they didn't want it. It was an unwanted pregnancy, unexpected, and so forth. But the intention may be there, but the results may be designer babies. Now that brings us to the point of eugenics. And America has an infamous history of the study of eugenics, and I can only touch on it today. Started in the late 1800s. There were eugenics societies that formed. There were one of the presidents, Woodrow Wilson, and what eugenics has to do with is improving the specimen, the human result. There was a time here in the early 1900s when the eugenic societies called for involuntary sterilization, and that was carried out. 32 states passed laws against interracial marriages. The poor, impoverished, and minority groups were put under the microscope, and in some cases they were involuntarily sterilized using the state systems, the prisons, and at that time they had poorhouses, and at that time they housed the insane, and then those who had mental issues, and they even categorized them into some categories that you and I wouldn't use that term today. I'm talking breakdowns into the way that they identified and rated people. We wouldn't use the term for some of the mental issues that people would have today. Eugenics caught on in America. They said that probably in that period between the late 1800s and 1975, when there was finally a law passed against involuntary sterilizations, that across America that there may have been as many as 60,000 involuntary sterilizations. They had all kinds of experiments. We're familiar with some of them. Some of them became infamous. I think they had black prisoners down south that they gave syphilis to and then wouldn't treat them so that they could study them and observe them and see what kind of effects the syphilis had on the human body. I read others where they were looking at poor people, and if they wanted to get rid of that part of that race, then they would feed them milk with tuberculosis germs in it so they'd get TB and die and they wouldn't reproduce. So there was a concentrated effort here in America to call eugenics, and it fell out of vogue after World War II because in the Nuremberg trials for the German atrocities, the Germans said we were just doing what we learned from America, because they came over here and looked at this idea of creating a master race. At one time, from what I read, researched that immigration policies were considered based on wanting people to immigrate from the Nordic countries, from Norway, Sweden, and Germany and different places, and not wanting Southern Europeans and those they consider lower. It was a caste system. It went on here in America. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, which was started in the 1930s, had a project called the Negro Project, where she was working on trying to eliminate, because they had terminologies that we wouldn't use today that would be shocking to us, and it would shock our conscience and violate laws that discriminated against certain ethnic groups. But she wanted to sterilize young black women who were poor and impoverished and didn't have good mental faculties or whatever. They called it keeping the gene pool in America pure, and it was an effort to create a superior race. Adolf Hitler picked up, because at one time it never came to fruition in America, but they did consider having gas chambers to eliminate the the poor, the infirm, the criminal mind, the people who couldn't control anger, and so forth. Well, I've run across my time again. I wanted to keep these programs to about 15 minutes, and not a lot of people just don't have the time to hang on. But I got to go. Go back to Psalms 139. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. By the way, eugenics went out of vogue after World War II because of that, but there are still people who believe in eugenics today, and mostly they're in the elite of society, and they want to create a master race, and they want to improve the gene pool, so to speak, and they're looking at ways to do that. Well, my Bible says that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. God knew us from the time we were in the embryonic stage, when we were in our mother's womb. Psalms 139, verse 14. Listen, don't lose fact. Don't lose sight of the fact that there's a God, that He loves us, that He can get near to us and draw along beside us. The Bible says here in Psalms 139 that He was there and watched over the formation of all of our limbs and wrote them in His book. I believe that. I don't think God is dead. I don't think that, as some of the futurists believe today, we don't need God today. We're going in to a different time. I don't believe that. Look up, draw near, let God draw near to you, and feel His presence and sense what He can do for you. God bless you. This is a Circuit Rider. I'm signing off. Have a great day.